We are 8 weeks away from NFL preseason football, which I don't know if that officially counts as football or not, but hell, we're going to count it because it has the letters NFL in it. So we're going to be doing a weekly breakdown of a different NFL division, and I got Yanni back with me because I can't break down an NFL division without Yanni, you know? How's it going, man?
It's going real well, man. I'm excited to be here. Once you hit that, you get under those triple digits as far as time till the NFL season. That's when you really got to crank up the work and start getting in here. And it'll be here before we know it, even though sometimes it seems like a while. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I also am kind of chomping at the bit to get going on the NFL stuff, you know? Oh, hold on a second, man. I'll have to edit this part out. Someone just rang my doorbell.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I knocked and then no one came for like 2 minutes and I was like,
I'm recording a podcast. Love you. No, you're fine. Love you. My daughter was locked out coming home from work.
Gotcha.
That was on purpose. Just kidding. It was not. Good. So, all right. I'm going to pick it back up where I left off, and I'll just edit it. Yeah, I'm excited to get into NFL as well. You know, when I looked and saw that there were 8 weeks left until preseason football, I was like, that is a perfect window to start talking about it. I feel like I'm not constantly, but every week kind of checking lines and stuff doesn't move right now. So I'm antsy, I guess you could say.
You know, whether you're a bettor, whether you're an NFL fan, these are they call them the dog days of summer. And I realize that summer just technically started, but if you're an NFL guy, if you're an NFL bettor, these are the dog days.
They really are the dog days. And I all love to JJ. I try to get into baseball and I watch some, but then I just want football to come. So
I hear you, man. I hear you. You know, dabble a little bit, obviously here and there, but you know, for me, the core of what I like to do is obviously NFL. So you know, it's nice. I love obviously Taylor and JJ. It's actually, you know, he's had a pretty good baseball season. You know, at least individually. So I've been able to kind of ride the coattails a little bit there, and you know, it's kind of nice. You make a little bit of residual income there for me, but for me, it's all about getting that and getting ready to prep for the NFL.
Up that bankroll, right?
You got
That's
it.
Always the plan. So, all right. Well, hey, we're gonna be doing one of these. Like I said, every week we're gonna go through all 8 divisions and gonna do a few things. So we're gonna talk about what the schedule looks like for the first half of the season, team by team. Talk about what that could mean for futures betting, or, you know, I think just some interesting conversation to be had with some of the injury questions and travel and lots of different things. Then we are going to talk about what has to happen for each team to have a chance of winning the division, or what would have to happen for them to win. And then we'll finish up with some potential player props for player performance, if there's anything we're interested in for either team. So we are going to start in alphabetical order, which leads us to the Arizona Cardinals. And who doesn't want to talk about the Arizona Cardinals?
Ooh, rough way to start.
I know it. We're getting it out of the way. We're just getting it out of the way first.
Hey, there you go.
So here's the Cardinals' first 8 games this year. They go to Washington to open the season. Giants at home, Dallas at home. Go to San Francisco, Cincinnati at home, to the Rams, to Seattle, and then Baltimore at home. So as you look at those first 8 games, is there anything that kind of sticks out to you? Obviously, this is a team that we don't expect to be very good. That's not a shocker. But anything stick out to you in this first half of the season that's noteworthy?
Where does that first win come? I mean, you know, I don't want to be a smart ass, but when you look at this Cardinals team, they're probably in all 8 of those games, it's very likely they'll be underdogs. Very likely. I mean, anything can happen. We don't know where things are going to be after week 3, whatever, but they're probably going to be underdogs there heading into the season. We don't know if Kyler Murray's going to start the season. We don't know for sure what's going to happen there. We don't even know if this team is done, you know, wheeling and dealing players for that matter. I mean, their roster could even still change. I think when we spoke a while back, we said, hey, this team's bad and they're probably going to be worse. And we mentioned DeAndre Hopkins potentially being shipped off, which happened. You know, we mentioned some other names, Isaiah Simmons, some other guys. So You look at this team, and unfortunately, they are in a full rebuild, which I think probably needed to happen for them. And I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, but they got to figure out what Kyler Murray is. Is he the franchise guy? Is he, where are we at with that? I mean, obviously from a contract standpoint, there's some difficulties there, but realistically speaking, when you look at this team and you look at that first half of the season, it's not the worst schedule in the world. I mean, you mentioned some good teams, obviously San Fran in the division, Cincinnati, they're going to have some tough games, but really you kind of look at that and you're like, okay, Washington, the Giants, I mean, these are what most people consider mediocre teams, right? So you think they got a shot to win, but can this team beat Washington? Can they beat the Giants? I mean, things would really have to go their way, I would say. And I just think when you have a new coach coming in who's an unproven coach, who's in the middle of a rebuild, that's a lot to ask in that first year. Maybe a veteran coach can get some things moving, whatever, but I just don't think they have the horses really on either side of the ball. I think we talked about it before. That defense is not going to be good. Offense, again, we don't know exactly what's happening at quarterback. They do have a couple pieces there, a couple veterans that are quality, but at the end of the day, I mean, what do you think? Can they win one of those first 8 games? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. That was sort of, I actually can't find it right now, but there is that market for the last team to win a game. Or you can find some places like what's the first game that they'll win. And there aren't any there's no layups for them, period, on this schedule. Like when I lay out my schedule and I either do, green, I think they're going to win, yellow, kind of in the middle, red, I think they're going to lose. It's mostly red and all yellow or red for the Cardinals. There's no game that I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure they're going to win this one.
Right.
So I think going to Washington to start is kind of tough. Like if that was at home, maybe, but also if Colt McCoy is starting out the season playing behind that offensive line, it almost doesn't matter that they have a couple okay weapons, I don't think. And then you've brought up before how the defense isn't likely to be good. So they're probably not going to stop people a lot either. As I look through that lineup, I mean, Washington and the Giants, if they don't win one of those, to have Dallas, San Francisco, Cincinnati, Seattle, Baltimore, those are 5 pretty tough games. And then going to the Rams, I think that's the other one that I would look at, and we're going to talk about the Rams as a possibility. And I won't get into this too much, but I think that this first half of the season is when the Rams might be okay still.
Right.
Before it kind of all unravels. So going
Agreed.
to the Rams in the first half of the season, I'm not sure is super easy either. So
Yeah.
when I look at these first 8, I just went through and kind of thought, hey, what would I project this team to be at the end of 8 games? For me, I've got them at 1-7, and I don't know where that win comes. It's Washington, the Giants, or the Rams. Probably they got to pull off one of those, but I don't see much hope for them to. I mean, 2 would be like crushing it for them, I think.
I agree. I mean, if you said, are they going to win 2 of those games? I mean, I'd say you're crazy. And, there is an interesting wager that I found, on DraftKings, if you're looking, and that is this gets a little away from the first 8 games. So I apologize if I'm a little off track here, but there's a bet on there that the Arizona Cardinals over under 1.5 division wins. And I think that's a really interesting bet. And you're like, oh man, I mean, if they're going to win, it's going to be in the division. Well, I don't see them beating the Niners. I don't see them beating Seattle. And I know I'm probably pretty high in Seattle. We'll get to them later. Maybe they split with the Rams. Like you said, you get the Rams early on the road. So the Rams, I mean, they're probably going to be favored, assuming, Cooper Kupp and Matt Stafford and Aaron Donald are on the field, which I guess we can't assume that, but if they are, there's that. So let's say they split with the Rams, which, that's possible, certainly. That gets you 1 win. I mean, so basically you're saying, are they going to steal a win from either the Niners or the Seahawks? I just don't see it. So the best part about that is that's a plus money wager right now. If you take the under, you can take the under 1.5 and it's plus 105. So it's basically even money. But, to me, I hate to be so down on a team because, you look at that and they surprise you, right? It's like they end up winning 7 games, whatever. But I just don't see that with this Cardinals team. I don't see that being a likely possibility. So I thought that was a really interesting bet, under 1.5 division wins at plus money.
Yep, totally agree. The other thing that I'll just throw out there and I've probably said this in some of the future stuff that I've put out there before, but obviously, not everybody's going to hear that. So If they go 1-7, or if they even go 0-8, that, even though they're under right now is at 4.5, which is pretty low, right? It's going to come down even more. I mean, it's going to move to 3. It's going to have to move to 3.5, or maybe even 2.5. At which point you could, if you have any faith in the Cardinals, which I don't think I would, you could even try to middle it or something. But I think this is one of the things I've been looking at with futures too, is like, hey, if maybe I don't have any confidence on betting the over or under with the Cardinals, that's fine. But if you want to bet their under, now is the time to do it. It's already moved from plus money to like minus 105 or minus 110 most places. On BetMGM, I just saw it's to minus 120, the under 4.5 now. So I just think if you do have any interest in that, you really need to do it sooner rather than later, because I don't think that line's going to improve.
Yeah, you nailed it. So I know when we talked about the Cardinals a few weeks ago, I actually did bet that under 4.5, and I got it at minus 105. As of today, it's minus 120. So you're spot on. I mean, and I think that's only going to continue down that path. So I think you're right. If you have any interest in betting that, do it now, because it's only going to continue going. And I mean, it's going to get to a point where it's not a reasonable number to bet.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I got it at plus 120 and then plus 101. But I would say, like, as we're talking here, I might not bet as much, but I think at minus 120, if I hadn't bet it already, I would still probably bet like to win a unit on that. Like, I think it's a good bet. But I wouldn't want the line to get away from me where it's minus 150 or it moves to 3.5 or something like that. So.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. Well, this is going to be a short conversation, but I'm going to ask the question because I said I was gonna. What needs to happen for the Cardinals to win the NFC West?
Oh man, I shouldn't even joke about it, but that movie We Are Marshall, and that's what I mean. How could they win this division? I mean, I don't. This is probably. I mean, there's obviously a few teams that you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But is there a path for them to win the division? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe if their coach is just so dynamic and we haven't seen it, which, by the way, I don't know that he is the right guy. That's a whole different conversation. I'd like to give you something to say they could win the division but to be honest, I think it would take catastrophic injuries and collapses from at least two of the teams in the division. I mean, I'm talking, and now in fairness, we've seen that happen to San Francisco before, so it's not impossible. But I mean, I feel like you need to have that happen to the Niners and the Seahawks, and then maybe, they have a chance competing against the Rams, so to speak. But the gap is too far, I think, at this point to find them a path of how they win the division. It has to be Kyler Murray truly being that number one pick, completely healthy from his ACL, which, I mean, that's unlikely to be the case getting the season started. And he just becoming Superman and putting that team on his back. And I don't know that he's that guy, even if he's healthy, but certainly coming back off an ACL with the new coaching staff without DeAndre Hopkins, that's asking a lot. So I wish I could give you something, because I always like to try to say, hey, maybe if this happens, but on the Cardinals, I just don't know how that happens.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to go a little sci-fi and say the only way I see it happening is if AI becomes sentient and the Cardinals are the only ones that have it. And it's just it's so beyond our intelligence. It comes up with play calls that nobody else could have thought of. That's all I've got for the Cardinals. I don't think it's happening otherwise. So I think in most of the divisions, you can make some kind of case for most of the teams. This is one of the divisions, though, where it is hard, and especially with the Cardinals, which is reflected in their line at plus 2,500 or so. I mean, even that isn't long enough odds for me.
No.
But it's the longest of any team in the NFL to win their division. So,
but by the way, both the Rams and the Cardinals obviously have long odds there. 2,500 you mentioned for Arizona. I think it's 800 for the Rams, if at least on DraftKings when I just looked. Neither of those are long enough. I mean, I would. To me, that's crazy. You would have to be insane to bet that. I think you need to double those to get any interest from me in looking at those. So I hear you.
Yeah, man. I'll throw this in while we're talking about them. Just I didn't go bet this because of some other bets I have, which maybe I'll talk about. But I think it's on DraftKings. There is a book where you can bet like a specific order for the teams to finish. And I think looking at Rams third place and Cardinals fourth place in some combination is something that, depending on the odds, is at least worth a look, because I think the chances of I would just say the chances of the Cardinals finishing last in this division are at least 50% to me. So if you get something in plus money, that feels like a good bet to me.
Totally agree with you on that. Yep.
All right.
Agreed.
Well, let's go to this then. Player props for the Cardinals. If there is anything, I'm going to actually throw two at you here and get your reaction to what you think about it, because I was kind of wrestling with both of these, and they're both unders. The first one is James Conner under 750.5 rushing yards, or the one that I like even more is under 6.5 rushing touchdowns. My case for that is that I think that this offense is going to be so bad that they're not going to have a lot of scoring opportunities. And I wonder if when they do score, they're probably not putting together long drives. So it's longer plays that they score on, which means James Conner isn't popping it in from the 1 yard line. I also think if Kyler Murray comes back, he becomes someone who takes away some of those goal line carries too. So that's kind of my case there. But the other one is on the flip side, and this is why I want to throw it to you, because I can't decide like which way to go. My other one is thinking about Hollywood Brown under 800.5 receiving yards. Number one, I don't think too highly of Hollywood Brown. And granted, this is lower than some of his season totals, but he's going to have maybe Colt McCoy throwing to him behind a patchy offensive line. And then we could get to Kyler Murray, but there's also Rondale Moore is okay. It's Dortch, I think, is they're not great, but I'm not sure that Hollywood Brown is this amazing receiver, and he's probably going to see the number one corner on a lot of other teams. So I just wonder if he gets taken away. My concern with that is if they're behind in a lot of games, maybe they're just chucking the ball a lot. So those are the two I was looking at. Curious your thoughts.
Well, what you said at the end is what I was going to kind of rebut with is, when you bet an over with props, obviously you're always banking on them staying healthy, which is why we see some of these lines so low, because, bettors have realized that betting unders makes more sense for the simple fact that people get hurt. So we don't know if Hollywood Brown can play a whole season. Now, assuming he does, if we're going to say, hey, he's probably going to make it 16, 17 games, what you said is what would scare me there on taking this under. I think you're right. I mean, he's going to be a watched man by the opposition there, not probably going to have the best quarterback play coming to him. But what you said is what scares me. They're probably going to be trailing a lot. So even if Hollywood Brown has 2 catches for 12 yards in the first half, well, if they're down by 3 touchdowns, he could end up a game with 8 catches for 90 yards. And yeah, maybe he didn't do much. Maybe it was garbage time. Maybe, the other team was playing soft, whatever it is. But that's what scares me. And honestly, the first thing I thought of when you said that was David Boston, who played for the Arizona Cardinals many years ago. Some of the younger listeners may not remember David Boston. He was, kind of a completely different guy in the sense that he was a massive man, whereas Hollywood Brown's a skinny, speedy guy. But same time kind of thing. He was a somewhat talented receiver who played on a bad Cardinals team, who was the number one weapon, who got a lot of second half garbage yards and ended up with a lot of yards at the end of the day. And that, when you mentioned Hollywood Brown, that was literally the first thought that came into my head. So that's what would scare me off of that and not betting that is I can see that absolutely being the case, that he gets garbage yards and basically because he's the only real option out there. And yeah, although I will say you mentioned too, and not to go long on the Cardinals here, but Rondale Moore, I mean, he is, to me, he's the one piece that I think has Pro Bowl type potential on this team that doesn't get talked about enough because he hasn't stayed healthy. There was a lot of health issues, whatever. If he stays healthy, he could certainly, he's a guy I think who has the ability to be a really good player. Are we going to see it? I don't know. But going back to Hollywood Brown, though, I'd be too afraid of him getting those second half garbage yards when they're trailing. And he ends up with 1,000 yards at the end of the year because he, caught a bunch of passes in the fourth quarter when they were down by 26 points.
Totally. David Boston was DK Metcalf before DK Metcalf was DK Metcalf.
You got it. Yeah, you got it.
Not quite as fast, maybe, but same body type.
He was absolutely complete opposite in terms of body of Hollywood Brown, but kind of that same
Exactly
same
the opposite,
mentality.
yep.
You know, it's like, and I could tell you this goes back a long ways, but I used to have. I mean, I can think of one year where David Boston basically won me a fantasy football league because I had him, and I mean, he was good for 100 yards and a touch every week. And again, not necessarily because he was amazing, but they were always down and throwing, and they didn't have a whole lot else. So it's like by default, he ended up with 100 and a touch every week. And you know, again, I could see Hollywood Brown maybe falling into that path as well.
Yeah, totally. What do you think about the James Conner one? If you think they're going to be throwing a lot, any interest on that?
You know, I think with Connor to me is kind of the one stable piece of this team, except he's had injury problems too. When I say stable, I mean he's consistent. But he's had injury problems too. And you know, I think it's one of those things where when you're betting on a player on a bad team, think about this. If the Cardinals are in a playoff run, right? Like they're competing, if Connor's maybe a little nicked up, he's out there playing, right? You know, they're trying to win, he's trying to whatever. If this team's like you said, if they're 1-7 and he's got a little knee issue or he's a little banged up, he's probably not playing, right? You know, so that to me, it's like lends itself again to the under, but the under's already pretty low. So, you know, it gets a little dicey there, but I can tell you this, even though I think Connor is probably maybe the best thing that team has going overall. And that's not saying a lot because I'm not saying James Conner is a great player, but he may be the best thing they have on that team, but I'd still go under on that just for the simple fact of I'd be surprised if you get a 17-game season of him running, you know, hard and getting a lot of workload and, you know, like you said, them getting a lot of short yardage touchdowns and that. I don't see that happening. I think, you know, by default, he probably ends up low across the board next year.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. Like, I definitely could see him eclipsing that, but just as far as props go, I definitely see the path for him to sit some games out, to not be as involved in the offense by the second half, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So,
Right.
Was there anything else from the Cardinals in terms of player props that had any interest for you?
No, not at all. And you know, in transparency here, I haven't gotten too into the player props just yet. I mean, obviously, I've glanced at them. I know, you know, we've chatted. Some people have chatted, but there's nothing on Arizona that jumps out to me from a player standpoint that I'm in love with. I mean, we talk about it all the time, under. And I mean, Arizona, I think, fits the mold on that. So if you are looking at those player props, it's hard to go over, even though we mentioned, like with Hollywood Brown, you could make the case of not betting that under and why, but I'm definitely not going over. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, let's move on to a team that's only mildly more interesting in the Los Angeles Rams. First half of the season for them, they start off going to Seattle right out of the gate and then hosting San Francisco. They have to go to Cincinnati on a Monday night. And then after that, they're at Indianapolis, Philadelphia at home, Arizona, Pittsburgh, and then they go to Dallas. When you look at those first 8 games for the Rams, how do you see them faring by the midway point?
Mildly better than the Cardinals. You know, that's not an easy schedule to start the season. I mean, obviously they have Arizona, who we mentioned. So that's a potential win. And, you know, they have Indianapolis, who is probably going to be building behind a rookie quarterback. So that's you know, certainly a potential win. And we got to give Sean McVay some credit here. I mean, he kept that team competitive last year when they really had no business being competitive. So obviously, either by his determination and grit and or his play calling and scheming, whatever combination of both, he's able to get his teams competitive. And I do think that even though this team overall is not good, I mean, you could argue that they have the thinnest roster, you know, maybe even more than the Cardinals. The only difference to me is they do have 3 or 4 marquee guys on that roster. So if Matt Stafford is healthy, if Cooper Kupp is healthy, if Aaron Donald's healthy, okay, maybe this team, you know, those guys are the type of guys. I mean, Cooper Kupp can go for 200 yards receiving. Aaron Donald can wreck a game on defense by himself. You know, he's one of those few guys that can do that. So, you know, that's why I'm like, yeah, they probably do beat the Cardinals. They probably do beat the Colts. But are those big names with a bunch of other, pardon this, but scrubs, are they going to be able to compete with some of those other teams you mentioned? They're not going to Cincinnati and winning. I mean, they're they're probably not beating Dallas. They're probably, I mean, you know, it's like they're not going to be favored in those games at least. And again, not to say they can't pull an upset when you have a Stafford, you have a Cup. I mean, you know, it's possible. But I just don't think there's enough there, even with McVay. So you start looking at it's almost a similar conversation to Arizona of like, okay, like you said, what do they do? 2-6 maybe in the first game, first 8 games, maybe because of, and I'm giving McVay a lot of credit again. Maybe he can find them a third win somewhere, or, you know, maybe like I said, Cup goes off, Donald does something crazy in a game and they steal another win. But to me, this team, kind of like last year, they're 2 injuries away from being potentially the worst team in the league, you know, and it's crazy when you look at their off season, and we know they're rebuilding. We know they had salary cap issues. We know they've given up draft picks, all that stuff. But I just got done. I'm doing some work on my end and, you know, kind of do the key additions and key losses there. And they really don't have a key addition. So this is a team that didn't finish the season very well, and they really didn't add anything. And then you start looking at the losses and you see guys like Bobby Wagner, who played at a high level for him last year, Leonard Floyd, who's been a consistent player for him, you know, Jalen Ramsey, obviously. And you start seeing these names and you're like, okay, this team didn't finish the season very well. And now you're taking even more of that kind of, I'm going to call it secondary level of talent that they had behind Donald and Cup and Stafford and that. How is this team competitive? I just think this team is truly looking ahead, you know, trying to kind of rebuild and build for the future. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if this team does start 2-6 or, you know, something like that. Would you be shocked to see Stafford on the bench, or, you know, Aaron Donald traded, or, you know, something to that effect? I mean, it's not impossible. So, you know, I'm looking at this and again, not a lot of high hopes for me on the Rams. I just don't, I think they're just too thin overall as a team. And unless Stafford, Cup, and Donald just dominate all year, I just don't see how they're really winning games.
Yeah, man. I mean, I pretty much love everything you said. I have 2-6 written down for them after 8 games. And I feel like I'm being a little bit generous. I think the opportunity betting wise with this team is that I mean, casual bettors, what does that mean? But I think it would be easier to get fooled by the roster of the Rams than it is to get fooled by the roster of the Cardinals. Because you look and you go, Cooper Kupp, one of the best receivers in the league, coming off an injury. Matt Stafford, he's been a good quarterback, right? Aaron Donald, multiple-time defensive player of the year. All of that is true, but in the NFL, I don't think you can win with 3 or 4 good players.
No.
And Matt Stafford is going to be behind a really shitty offensive line again. So when he doesn't have time, he's pretty much a statue, and he's getting older. You said it, but I think Stetson Bennett gets in there and they try to develop him and see what they've got. Like, I'm not saying he'll be their long-term solution, but I think 6-8 games in, they're going to be like, hey, why not try it? I think Aaron Donald is going to want to get traded. There's been rumblings of that before, and I think he's not going to be content being on a bad team. I think Cooper Kupp, like you had said for James Conner, if this team is 1-4, 1-5, and they know that they have like a great trade asset or someone you want to have for the future in Cooper Kupp, are you throwing him out there every week to like risk him getting another bad injury? I just think, like, if I had to go over or under expectations, even at 6.5 for the season on this team, I think it's under decidedly. Like, this is another one where 6.5 is still minus 110 right now. And I got in before that, but if I hadn't, I would get in on that. Because if this team's 2-6 after 8 games, that number is coming down again. I think also, like what you said on the defense of the people that they lost, and I was just looking through their depth chart again. I did this earlier, but their free safety is Russ Yeast. One of their quarterbacks is Robert Rochelle. I mean, these are guys like, and probably some people who are even deeper into it than I am are like, oh yeah, he played at this college and did all this stuff. But like, they don't have anyone really notable other than Aaron Donald on their whole defense. Like, I'm afraid against decent offenses, they're just going to get shredded. Yeah. So yeah, this is a team that I don't have high hopes for at all. And I really do mean what I said earlier, where like Arizona gets them at home in the second half of the season. I think that's a game Arizona could win.
Right.
Because by that time, I just don't know who the Rams are running out there.
Right.
So, all right. Well, we kind of have covered it, but any thought, like maybe I would ask it this way. Do you see any legitimate path for the Rams to compete for the division?
I mean, realistically, no. I mean, I mentioned it plus 800. I think those odds are out of whack. But, you could say that if Cooper Kupp and Stafford kind of have that connection and, maybe some of those younger guys on defense are kind of like you said, maybe they're better than we think they are, or, whatever. And Sean McVay has to really just put his best foot forward with what he's doing. And we saw him do it last year. So it's not like he's not capable. So I think the path for them is Sean McVay has to go from being, already one of the potentially best coaches in the league to he's got to elevate himself even more. I think this team has to run the football more and better. And the defense, there's going to have to be some hidden gems in there. Some of those guys you mentioned are going to have to maybe be those guys that nobody really knows about, but maybe there's a hidden gem in there that's an all-pro player that gets a shot and whatever. I mean, that's their only path. And of course, the biggest one is obviously their big three have to stay healthy. I mean, if that doesn't happen, I think, you can go ahead and can't count that out. So is there a path there? Yeah, I mean, there is. It's very, very unlikely to me, but those are the things that I think would need to happen in order for them to get there.
Yeah, I like where you're at. I mean, yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I was just thinking if I had to pick between them finishing, if you told me they finished second or fourth, I would assume they finished fourth.
Yeah.
More than that they finished second.
Agreed.
I just don't think too much here. Well, let's move to any player props. I have one here that I'm interested in. I haven't bet it, but anything that caught your eye as you looked over some of the player props for the Rams?
No, again, kind of it's kind of the same story as what we had with Arizona there. I don't like a lot of what the Rams have there. I mean, I love Cooper Kupp. I think you literally could argue, well, when healthy, that he is the best receiver in the league, and that includes your guy, Justin Jefferson. I mean, you can argue that. But again, I don't trust the durability there, especially if this team isn't winning games. So when I look at that, I don't know if they can run the ball. I don't see a viable second target that you're like, hey, I think this guy's going to step up and crush it or, whatever type thing. So, you're kind of limited to Stafford and Kupp. And I mean, if anything, Stafford under seems like the best play out there, and only because I think there's a very good chance that he doesn't complete the season. Whether that's due to, hey, we're getting crushed and we're going to try Stetson Bennett, or I got landed on my shoulder because my offensive line can't block, whatever that is. So again, I think the books have kind of factored that in a little bit. His number is lower than, a Matt Stafford number should probably be to start a season. But I think you could look at the under there just because I think the likelihood of him not playing an entire season, I think it's pretty high.
Yep. Did you find any Stafford numbers out there? I wasn't able to find a yardage for him.
Yeah, so if you look, so DraftKings did not have his yardage. FanDuel does not have his yardage, but I did see it somewhere, and I have
it on Bovada? Because I don't have Bovada, so I wonder if it was.
It was not on Bovada,
okay.
But I did see it. It is set at. Hold on, I've got it here. It's a pretty low. Let's just say this: it's a pretty low number, and whenever it gets posted, it's probably going to be around that. Would be my guess. When you compare it to kind of some of those other quarterbacks that I would consider in the tier of Matt Stafford. But I think, the books are stuck in that same tough spot of what are we going to get out of him? Is he going to play 17 games? And I think they're factoring that in because I think they think people are going to hammer that under, obviously driving that number down. I think that's also why it's not posted in a lot of places right now currently yet either. I think some people are probably trying to figure out what to do with that. So, but I would just say this, as I look, his under is one that I think is very playable even at the low number.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I figured it wasn't posted where I was looking to. And I'm with you. That was actually, I didn't have a number, but I thought almost whatever they set it at, I would pretty much take an under because I agree that I think he's unlikely to finish the season. And yeah, whether it's injury or whether it's just seeing what they've got in Bennett. I also am even though I love Cooper Kupp, I would be interested in under 1,250.5 yards receiving for him. Similar reasons, right? I mean, number one, he's coming back from a pretty brutal injury. So who knows where, I mean, I think he'll be fine to start the season, but there is also this discrepancy of like, even, is he 85%? Is he 90%? He may not be all the way at full go. And the same thing of my only fear is, do they trade him and he gets on a team where he's got a good quarterback, who's got a good offensive line, and then that number goes over. But if he stays on the Rams, I think there's a good chance he doesn't play every game, and he doesn't have a quarterback who can get him the ball. So I haven't bet it, but that's the one that was most interesting to me, and it's not because I don't think he's good.
I understand.
So we can argue about Justin Jefferson.
Yeah. Well, and just so you know, I don't have which book, so I mean, but I'm assuming when these get posted, I have jotted down here that he was at 3,400.5 yards for Stafford. And to put that in comparison, that's Mac Jones, that's Daniel Jones, that's Bryce Young. So, I mean, they're putting him in some pretty low company. Obviously, I think we all agree that Stafford has the ability and potential to throw for way more yards than that. But I think that kind of tells you where at least, early positioning is feeling that, hey, he's not going to get a whole season. And, that they have to set it low to try to entice people maybe to bet over there. Or, to your point, that he could be a number that some books just don't even post, right? I mean, I could see certain books just staying away from even putting anything out there on him, and that wouldn't shock me.
No, me either. All right, well, let's move on from these cellar dwellers to the two teams that are really worth talking about in the division, and we will keep going alphabetically by my abbreviations, not by the full spelling, because this always throws me off. It would be San Francisco, but I'm going to Seattle because of how I abbreviate them. So we're going to go to the Seahawks next. First 8 games, they have the Rams at home, so they start with a barn burner. Then they go to Detroit. They have Carolina at home. They go to the Giants on a Monday night, and then they have to go to Cincinnati the following week. They get Arizona and Cleveland both at home, and then they go back across the country to Baltimore. This is a team I know that you're high on, and I'm curious to hear how you think they get their season started.
Yeah, not easy. I mean, you mentioned Cincinnati, obviously we know is going to be a tough game. Normally the Giants is kind of one of those ones where if you get them at home on Sunday, you probably win that game, right? Well, going to the Giants on Monday night, that becomes a little harder. That's going to be tougher. You mentioned going across country to Baltimore. That's a tough task to go all the way across country there and play that game. So it's not an easy schedule, but you also mentioned a couple very, I would say, expected winnable games in there as well. So when you look at that, I think if I'm Seattle, I'm one of those teams that I'm trying to go through that first half of the season and steal a win. And what I mean by kind of hold serve with the games that you feel you should win. So, for example, the Rams at home, right? You're like, hey, we should win that game. So do you win those, and then between Cincinnati or that Monday night game in New York or Baltimore, can you steal a game? And I think that this team is good enough to steal a game. And quite frankly, this team under Pete Carroll seems like the type that they do steal games occasionally like that. Now, the problem they have is sometimes they stub their toe in those games that they should win. But I think I'd rather be a team like that for the simple fact that you can compete with anybody. So you could, on your best day, beat a Cincinnati if you play great and, they have an off day or whatever. And I like that. So they obviously have to clean up and make sure they win the games that they do, and then maybe try to steal a game there. So is 6-2 a possibility in those first games? I think it is. More realistically, obviously, I mean, I think you're looking more at that 5-3-ish type mark. I think less than that, and you're disappointed if you're a Seahawks fan. I think if you're at that 4-4 mark or lower, you're not off to a good start, and you may not have the season that you want to have. We'll see. But as you said, I'm very high on this team. I think they can hit that 5-3 to start the season, maybe even 6-2. That's getting aggressive, but not impossible. I mean, it could happen. When I look at this team, I'm the type of person that I owe Pete Carroll an apology, because I've been pretty hard on him as a head coach really for a long time. I mean, I really have. I just kind of felt like, he's kind of that college rah-rah guy, and he's kind of cheesy and, whatever. But you start looking back, and other than not giving Marshawn Lynch the ball on the 1 yard line in the Super Bowl, which is an all-time blunder, other than that, you start looking at some of the things he's been able to do from a personnel standpoint, and he's made some really good decisions over the years. I mean, that team paid a lot of money to, Matt Flynn back in the day, and he said, nope, I'm going with Russell Wilson, and that worked out, right? I mean, he kind of knew. I mean, it was almost like we're letting Russell Wilson go and we're going to get what we can for him because we don't think he's got it anymore. And well, at least as of last year, he was right. Not to say that Wilson can't rebound, but at least as of last year, that looks pretty smart. Yep. And, then you look, I remember when I made fun of him on one of the podcasts I was on. I don't remember which one, but I made fun of him going into last season because he said, Geno Smith's my guy, and I think he's going to be really darn good, and we're done. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute here. Like, you're not going to draft someone? You're not going to give Drew Lock a chance? You're not going to, like I was criticizing that and saying, you're crazy, whatever. But he said it. He looks so good in camp. I think he's going to be a good quarterback for us, and we can win with him. And he was right. And, so it's like you start looking, you're like, okay, maybe I need to give this guy his due. Maybe that's why he's a head coach and I'm not, right? I mean, so it's like you start looking at that, and then you start talking about the X's and O's, and he runs a very unique game plan on both sides of the ball. And obviously he's coordinators, but we know he's kind of that smash mouth guy, right? He wants to kind of run the ball. He wants to kind of play defense. And we know that generally doesn't win in the NFL these days. But I think that he's kind of found a way here to where he can mix that in with some explosive offense. And I think that it's going to work for him this year because I think they fixed the defense. And when you look at their ability to throw the ball in addition to running the ball, I like what they can do. So, at the end of the day, that's why I'm high on this team. I have one major concern with this team, and it's really the only concern I have. I don't like their defensive line. They didn't stop the run very well last year, and I don't know that they necessarily got a lot better there. And they didn't really get after the quarterback that well either. And I don't know that they necessarily got much better there either. Those things are important. So if I'm trying to poke holes in the Seahawks, that's where I'm doing it. Outside of that, though, I love this offense. I think this offense could potentially be a top 2-3 offense in this league. Will they? We'll see. But I think they have that potential to get there. And then on that defensive side of the ball, their back seven, which is, again, kind of the way Pete Carroll likes to build his teams, their back seven is stout, man. I mean, that's as good of a back seven as you'll find. The question is, will they get enough out of that defensive line? So anyways, that's a long way of saying I'm very high on them. Is it a slam dunk? No, but I think everything's lined up for them to be even better than they were a year ago, quite a bit better than they were a year ago.
Yeah, that's a big endorsement, man. And I think you're even a little higher on them than I am, though. Getting Bobby Wagner back, you talked about that, and I think the command on the field is a big deal. I think it helps the defense a lot. I agree about the defensive line, and I actually hoped there were some rumors flying around about them making a trade for some free agents, maybe picking somebody up, and none of that materialized, which is a little bit disappointing for them, I think, because that could have been a piece. I don't know that it puts them over the top necessarily, but it would have addressed what you're talking about as their biggest weakness. I have them at 5-3 after the first 8, and I think it's very similar to what you said. I think that they at least have a great chance to win all 4 games at home. The Rams, Carolina with a young quarterback, Arizona, Cleveland, which Cleveland could be all right, but again, traveling to Seattle, like all the way to the West Coast, and them traveling all the way to the East is a little bit bigger deal than some of these other home and away things. Not that it decides the game, but I think then going to Detroit and going to the Giants, those both seem like winnable games to me potentially. And to your point, of course they can steal one at Cincinnati or Baltimore. Like it can happen because anything can happen. But I like them to get those 4 that they should and then pick up one more and be at 5-3. I do also agree with what you were saying about their hopes for the season, but I would say this is a team that I do think can compete for the division. But if they're not 5-3 after these first eight games, I think that's trouble for them because I think these are winnable games. And if they want to take out San Francisco, I think they need to get at least 5 in these first 8. So Yeah, so that's what I'm with you there. I guess one question that I would have for you is, what do you think happens offensively with the addition of Jackson Smith and Jigba? We always stumble over the name there, but I'm curious what you think. And obviously, we don't know, but do you have any gut on how this plays out in terms of target share? Or, you've got Lockett and Metcalf. Is one of those guys going to lose some targets? What does this offense look like, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the crystal ball to know that, but I would say this. I think, Lockett to me seems like an unselfish guy. So I think he's going to do what he does. And I think that Geno Smith has a lot of confidence in a guy like Lockett. So I don't know that he'll fall off too much, but if he does, I don't think he's the type of guy that's going to care. Metcalf, that might be a little bit different story, right? Like he's more of the give me the ball type receiver. But I think, he kind of plays a different role than, I'm going to call him JSN because I can't pronounce his name either. So
that seems like a good plan.
Yeah. So I think that I don't think it'll impact him as much, maybe Metcalf, but this team to me was kind of in dire need of that third option in the receiving game. And I think the great thing is both Lockett and JSN are the versatile type receivers. I mean, Lockett can get downfield, but he's not afraid to go over the middle or catch the bubble screen. He'll do that stuff too. And I think JSN, I mean, he's going to work primarily in the slot. But I think that they have enough diversity on there that they can probably work all three of those guys in, even if they're all healthy. And I honestly only think that's going to make them stronger, because if you think about it, let's say that JSN does come in and he's just crushing it and he's kind of that dynamic rookie that's getting open and making plays. Well, now all of a sudden, DK Metcalf's got a lot more room on the outside to maneuver out there, right? And Lockett for years was a well-covered guy. Now he's he's almost an afterthought, and he's a very good receiver. So I like that, and this is a team that hasn't traditionally used the tight end a lot. So I think that JSN can kind of fit that role in the passing game, and kind of be that needed third weapon when they throw. So I know sometimes with receivers, you look and say, well, can it get too muddy with too many and this and that? But I don't see that with this team. I think that they're going to find a way to work all three of these guys in different forms and fashions. And, it's almost, if those guys are unselfish and the offense can figure it out, it's almost like pick your poison. I'm going to throw to whichever guy's open. You want to try and cover, you want to play two deep safeties. We're doing this. You want to play cover three. We're going over the middle with JSN type things. So that's to me what I look at. I don't anticipate that being a problem at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. And I do agree that as long as they can all be okay with that strategy of like pick your poison and hit whoever's open, and it doesn't cause like discontent, then I think that is a huge asset. So, and that's part of, to me, like I have one player prop that stuck out to me, but overall it feels really hard to me to know what to predict, because I don't know how all of this stuff is going to work its stuff out. We've never seen JSN play in the pros either. So we don't know exactly how he's going to be, though we expect him to be good. So, but like you said, definitely the chance to be a very dynamic offense. Before we hit that player prop, is there anything you'd say that you haven't so far about just in particular what has to happen for them to win this division?
Well, I think a few things need to happen. I think we need to, part of what we just talked about needs to happen, right? They have to find that rhythm on offense that allows them to be more explosive regularly. We know they're going to try to run the ball. We know they can throw the ball. So they've got to do that on a consistent basis. And I think we need to see more big plays from them. And we would get it occasionally from them. You get a Lockett deep or Metcalf making a big play. I mean, even Kenneth Walker would break a few long runs, but we need more of that. So I think, if that offense can come be more dynamic and be one of those, as I mentioned, top 2 or 3 type offenses, to me, that gives them a legitimate shot to win this division. The other thing I would say is if that defensive line can step up and make plays, can Draymond Jones be a guy that really elevates his game? Can they find a pass rusher off the edge that's wreaking havoc? If that happens, they can absolutely win this division, because honestly, I don't think it's a stretch to say that from a, top to bottom standpoint, I think their roster is one of the better rosters in the NFL. Even you could put it close to San Francisco's roster, in my opinion. and close to any of the really good teams' rosters, in my opinion here. So you look at that and you say, if Geno Smith can have an even better second season at starter, if they can be explosively consistent on offense, and if that defense can kind of get after the quarterback better and stop the run a little bit better, they can absolutely win this division.
Yeah, you hit on the thing that seems big to me for them to win the division, and that is Geno Smith has to prove it to me. I mean, he proved it last year, but this is like, hey, it's season number 2. Let's see you follow through and do it again. And I think part of that is the offensive line protecting him. This is a guy that like slings the ball pretty well. He is more of that pocket passer, and I think if they can keep him clean, he's going to have the weapons. That's where the dynamism is going to come in. I think where they can get into trouble is when he's under a ton of pressure and has trouble finding his receivers. So I think if they can keep Geno Smith clean and he kind of says, hey, it wasn't a fluke last year. Yeah, this team's going to be great. And I expect them to be right there. I already have a bet on them to win the division, partly because of the price that it was, so I like that. In terms of player props here, I don't have much. The only thing that I was a little interested in, and I'm just hesitant to bet any like over kind of stuff. So I'm not saying I would bet this, but because of what you've just been talking about with this offense, Geno Smith to have 4,000 pass yards was plus 120. Plus money on that seems okay. I mean, obviously that's not something he's accomplished a lot in his career, but this is a different offense than he's been a part of before too. So that was the one that I thought was interesting, at least.
Yeah, I echo that. I think that we know they're going to try to run the ball, and that's obviously the concern with this passing prop, and of course injury as always. But yeah. I think that if he stays healthy, he'll get there. I think that that is in today's NFL, that is a very manageable number for a potentially explosive offense that's going to potentially have 3 dynamic weapons. I have no skin in the game in the sense of I'm not a Seahawks fan, but I will be disappointed if Geno Smith does not have a very good season here. So I'm with you on that. And I did have one other prop just to mention here, not player prop, but you kind of mentioned, the Seahawks and odds to win the division. There's a really, really, really good bet that I like here. As you guys can probably tell, I'm very partial to the Seahawks this year, but you can bet the Seahawks to make the playoffs at yes for minus 110. So basically regular juice there. And when you look at the NFC, let's just say that San Fran wins the division. Let's say the Eagles are in the playoffs. We'll even be gracious and say that Dallas gets in there. The division winner in the West, you got, 4. And the South, the South, you got 4. And then, then you start saying, okay, so there's a few more playoff spots out there. Who's left? Well, obviously the North winner is going to get in. So now you got a couple more spots out there, but I don't see how this team doesn't make the playoffs. I mean, I think it would take catastrophic injury. I don't know. So give me that regular juice number. I mean, I've already bet that. I think that they are going to make the playoffs in the NFC. Now, if they're in the AFC, total other story. We're talking about, well, are they going to be better than the Chargers? Are they going to be better than the Ravens? We're having all those conversations. You don't have to do that in the NFC. If you're asking me, they're potentially the 3rd best team in the NFC. Now, that doesn't mean they are. Vegas doesn't think that they are, and a lot of other people don't think they are. And I'm not saying that they are, but I think you could make the argument they're the 3rd best team in the NFC. And are you going to sit there and say, oh gosh, Dallas is way better than Seattle, or whoever, pick your team, whoever you want to pick there. Oh, they're way better than Seattle. I don't see it. So anyways, that's a long way of saying that I like Seattle to make the playoffs at minus 110.
Well, man, and there's a couple things, and maybe I'm going a little long on Seattle, but I think there are a couple other things that point to that being a good bet that I like. I was just looking back at the division lines, and there might be a better line out there, but I just looked at MGM quick. I a little while back took Seattle to win the division at plus 275. It's plus 210 on MGM. Now, maybe it's a little bit better other places still, but like there's movement in this direction. Like I think people are seeing what you're seeing, at least to some extent. And so if you can find places like you just said for the playoffs, I was going to pull back up here. You were talking through the different teams, but agreed. Like Atlanta and New Orleans both have incredibly soft schedules. In my opinion, with the work I've done, it's the 2 softest schedules in the league.
Right.
So there's a chance they both make the playoffs in my book just because their schedules are so easy. But I don't think Minnesota is going to be great. I don't think like I think whoever wins the North is in. I'm not sure a second team is. I mean, maybe,
Right.
but it's iffy. I think Seattle and Dallas are the next best non-division winning teams in the NFC, I would say. And I
I
would put them in
agree.
that order personally. So
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, that's kind of the way I looked at it is okay, when you look at, let's just say division winners, and let's say you're going to say San Francisco's the division winner, you start saying, okay, who are the wild card teams? To me, like I said, and like you said, I mean, I think Seattle's first in that line, so
yeah,
I really like them. And, to me, when I saw that, I would expect that to have been more of a minus 140, minus 150 type, thing.
yeah,
So when you get it at that, I mean, to me, that I don't know. I really like that play.
agreed, man. All right, well, let's move on to the final team, the San Francisco 49ers. First half of their schedule, they start off going to Pittsburgh in a game that honestly is very interesting to me because I just have sort of an increasing optimism about Pitt. I'm not like I'm a fan, but I keep thinking maybe they're going to be better than I've thought. So I think that could be a tough game. They go to the Rams, then they have the Giants at home on a Thursday night, Arizona at home, Dallas at home. Then they go to Cleveland, go to Minnesota on a Monday, and get Cincinnati at home. So I would say they start out after Pittsburgh, they get a couple softer games, but overall, not an incredibly easy first 8 games. Where do you think this team ends up? And I mean, especially with some of the questions that we still have at quarterback and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you basically just said it. I mean, what can you grade this team without knowing what's going to happen at that position? Now, I will say if there's one team in the NFL that you can grade without knowing the quarterback situation, it's probably the Niners, right? I mean, it seems like they can plug whoever in there. And because they've built up a nice roster and Kyle Shanahan knows how to move the pieces around, that they can kind of make it happen. But I worry a little bit about that. I really do. I mean, I think Purdy can get the job done, but I don't know that he's going to be ready. I don't think we know what Trey Lance is at this point. I know Sam Darnold, I think, is on that roster, and who knows? He's the veteran. He might get the start. We at this point we know. So that makes it a little harder to kind of gauge what's going to happen here. If you told me that Brock Purdy was healthy and we knew he was starting day one, he was going to get the reps in training camp, I'd feel pretty good about this team. And I mean, I still feel pretty good about them regardless, but it does make me question that a little bit. And I have one other concern here with the Niners when we look at the beginning of the season and really the entirety. I don't know how good their offensive line is, to be honest with you. I mean, we know they have Trent Williams at tackle. I mean, that's obviously nice. But I mean, and look, he's getting older too. I mean, and I'm not suggesting he's not going to be great. I mean, he probably will. He's an all-pro. He's probably the best left tackle in the game. But he's getting older, and you look at the rest of that line, and I don't know that it's that great. Now, the flip side of that is nobody seems to know how to manage utilizing an offensive line better than Kyle Shanahan. So it may not matter. I mean, maybe they can plug whoever in there kind of like at quarterback and make it work. But I think when people look at this team, I think the one thing you have to be cautious about is you get enamored with they've got a dozen really, really, really good players. A dozen, probably more than any other team in the league as far as like, that top tier type player. When you look at a Deebo Samuel, a Kittle, that they added Javon Hargrave to a defense, as they kind of retooled that defensive line, you got guys like Fred Warner and that. So, this team has a lot of talent. And I think you can get caught up in that. And it's almost like, oh, they've got so much talent that it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback. And to some extent, I agree with that. But I think, I think that quarterbacks and offensive lines win in this league. And when you look at the uncertainty right now at San Francisco, it's quarterback and offensive line, and that scares me. So when you look at those first 8 games, I would not be shocked if there's a little bit of slow out of the gate there. I mean, we saw this team go into Chicago and lose to open the season last year. Now, granted, it was a monsoon. So, you got to take that into account and whatever. But I would not be shocked if we see a slow start from this team or slower start from this team than maybe some people expect. And as you mentioned, it's not a cake schedule. I mean, there are a couple nice, pretty easy. I don't want to say easily winnable. I don't think there's probably not such thing in the NFL, but there are some very winnable games in that first 8, but I don't know that this team gets out of the gate fast. So do you say, what does that mean? Is that 5-3? Is that, what are we looking at there? And I think it's less than whatever you think, in my opinion. If you think they're 6-2, I'm saying 5-3. If you think they're 5-3, I'm saying 4-4. That's just kind of how I'm approaching it. I do think that once they kind of get some stability at that quarterback position, which I think they will, whether that's with Darnold or whether that's with Lance or whether Purdy comes back and can play, I think that they can be one of those teams that gets hot at the right time and, does still win the division, or at least, get in the playoffs and make a run. But I don't know that they're going to start the year out great. So, and I could be wrong, but that's just kind of my gut feeling.
Yeah, I'm actually similar. So, I mean, I certainly think one of the big things they have going for them is they have a really solid defense. So they're likely to be in games, especially a great defensive line. I mean, that's the kind of thing, like in a game against the Seahawks, Geno's probably going to be under some pressure, right? That's the same is going to be true for other quarterbacks because that defensive line is just so good. But you do look back at last season, and obviously every season is different, but you had mentioned them losing to Chicago. Not only that, though, they lost to Denver, they lost to Atlanta, they lost to Kansas City. They were 3-4 after 7 games.
Right.
Now, some of that was Trey Lance started, right? Like their quarterback position could be more settled this year if Purdy's healthy and looks okay like he did last year. But this is the team that, for me, I just have the most variance on in terms of where I think they could end up after 8 games. So I look at this schedule and I think they beat the Rams, even though that's an away game. I think they beat the Giants at home on a Thursday, and I think they beat the Cardinals at home. None of those are shockers, right? But I'll just say, like, at Pittsburgh, I already bet Pittsburgh plus 3.5 in that game. Like, I think that's at least a close game, and I definitely think Pittsburgh can win it. Dallas at home, I'd expect them to win that game, but I certainly don't think it's a layup.
Nope.
At Cleveland, I mean, Cleveland's made some nice moves on their defense and stuff lately. Like, they're not going to be a pushover of a team. At Minnesota on a Monday night, I'm not super high on Minnesota this year, but they're one of those volatile teams that on the right night at home could beat, anybody in a one-off, I think. And then Cincinnati at home. So I think they're somewhere between 6-2 and 3-5. Mm-hmm. So I actually have them at 4-4. And we'll see. Like, again, I think that defense keeps them in every game. But I, with you, think they might get out of the gate a little bit slowly as they get their feet under them again and get quarterback figured out for sure and all this kind of stuff. And in terms of betting, one of the things that leads me to is if I'm interested in betting San Francisco to win the division, I'm waiting. The best thing you can get right now is minus 150, which isn't terrible. It was worse. It was minus 175. But to me, it's still not worth it because if they do go 4-4, and if Seattle does go 5-3 or blow it out and they're even 6-2, now all of a sudden you're probably getting at least plus 100 on San Francisco.
Right.
And then that's probably a bet worth making. And if it doesn't come along, I'm okay just passing. But that's something that I think is worth watching if they do get off to that slow start.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I think if you are on San Fran, I think you wait. I think you're right. And to your point, I mean, I would not be shocked if they start out slow and they get it together and they're great. There's one other interesting thing with this team, and it's really funny. So I was talking with a buddy of mine. He played college football, and we went to the same college, obviously. And when they had a coaching change, in between, whatever, and they played kind of a different style, whatever. And he basically said, in terms of the 49ers, he said, what's interesting? He said, the style that they play, it's very aggressive. It's very, you mentioned the defense. It's a hard hitting defense. The offense is based on hard blocking, that kind of a thing. Have we seen a team over the past 4 or 5 years that's been more injury prone than San Francisco? And, last year they were fortunate outside of the quarterback position that they mostly stayed healthy. They did have a couple, issues here and there, but for the most part, they were the core of that kind of, what we say top 12 or so player. They were able to keep most of that healthy back. And they've almost been, since Shanahan's been there, they've almost been an every other year team in terms of their injury, prowess. And look, I'm going to say that I think injury is all luck and circumstance, right? You either get injured or you don't. It's good luck if you don't. It's bad luck if you do. But maybe there is a little bit something to that style that they play and maybe contributing to some of that, whatever. So that really, to me, is the other part here is when you use the word volatile. This team, I mean, we saw this team 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? No, 3 years ago, I guess it would have been, that should have been really good, and they were awful. And they were awful because they were missing like 20 players on their roster. And 2 years before that, when, it was the same story. So, you wonder, is it due for another one of those? They kind of got lucky last year. They stayed healthy, except for the quarterback position again. So I don't know. It's you can't necessarily handicap for that. You can't predict that. You can't really bank on that per se. But I do think it's an interesting discussion to think about when you think about this 49ers team. So again, I think you're right, though. I think you start slow with them. You evaluate what's happened after, let's say, those first 8 games. And if they are underachieving, but they're healthy or getting healthier, then I think, like you said, when the number's more in your favor, you can jump on them. Because I do still think they're a top 2 team in that NFC. I just worry that they can stay in that position. I think they are. Whether or not they can stay there, that's the question. And will they start out fast? I just don't know.
Yep. Well, in terms of San Francisco winning the division, I think 2 things you just said stick out to me as big things. And that is, number 1, figuring out quarterback. I mean, honestly, even with Brock Purdy, it's a relatively small NFL sample. It's not like this guy was lighting the world on fire in college. And so I think we have to see more out of him. And like you said, San Francisco is a good place to be if you're an average quarterback too. Like, you could fare pretty well there as an average quarterback. And they do have some other options they could try out. But I think that is something that has to get settled. And the other thing is health. I think this team has a really good roster if they're healthy. But if you go look at some of their depth, as with a lot of teams in the NFL with a salary cap and everything else, there are some drop-offs if some key people start to get hurt. So to me, those things stick out as important pieces of them winning the division. Is there anything else that sticks out to you as pretty important for that?
No, I'll keep it brief because I already went long on the Niners, but I will say what you just said with health. I hope he stays healthy because he's literally one of my favorite players maybe ever, and that's McCaffrey. And, he did stay healthy last year, but the previous 2 seasons he did not. So again, it's kind of that old, like, okay, last year it worked out, but historically the previous couple seasons it didn't. So I think, like you said, health is a big thing to watch because, there's a big drop off between Deebo Samuel and the next guy, right? It's not like you're going from, like you said, Rondell Moore to Greg Dortch, right? I mean, it is what it is. Right. That. But, when you're talking about those guys like George Kittle, and now you're going to Ross Dwelly or whatever, they're doing that. There's a big drop off there. And I think they have enough talent that they can overcome that if it's 1 or 2 of those kind of guys. But again, we've seen the San Francisco team get decimated where you have no Kittle and you have no Samuel and then it's like, man, all of a sudden, like you said, the depth, who are you marching out there? So, they have some good players across the board. I don't want to belabor the point, but that's the one thing, for whatever reason, this team is like the one team that I really look at and say injuries really scare me with this team.
Yep. Well, that leads right into player props for me. And again, as has been the case with many of these, I'm not sprinting to the window to bet them, but these are things that I'll do more. I know you do a lot more work on this stuff as we get closer to the season too, and I'm going to look at some of them more, but I'm curious about Christian McCaffrey under 900.5 yards. Now, is 900.5 high for him? Absolutely not. I mean, if you go back and look what he does per carry and per season, 900.5 is low, but there's a couple of factors here for me. Number 1 is he is getting older, and we see the way that running backs fall off as they get older. Now, he's a special running back, and I'm not saying he's going to be terrible, but I think even about going to the Vikings, because it's a team I pay attention to, Dalvin Cook last year with the Vikings. Yes, he was injured a little bit, and maybe he's healthier now. Maybe he'll show everyone up, but you just start seeing him lose this half step where he used to hit that whole half a step faster and he'd turn it into a 20-yard run instead of it being a 4-yard run because he didn't quite get through the hole fast enough. I wonder if that starts to get Christian McCaffrey a little bit. Also, I do think there's injury risk for him there. He just has that history. And so to some extent, I'd have to ask myself, do I want to make a bet on whether someone's able to play 17 games or not? Those aren't bets I'm probably super interested in. But that is the other piece for me, is it wouldn't shock me, even if he doesn't get hurt in a devastating fashion, to see him miss 3 or 4 games. And obviously that brings down the rushing total. So that was the one that, I have a little interest in. There wasn't really anything else I saw from this team that is super interesting to me.
I'm with you on that. And I think you've got to look at kind of what was McCaffrey's role when he came there last year. And obviously at first they were working him in, but they were utilizing him as they should a lot in the passing game, right? So it wasn't all just we're going to drop back and hand the ball off, because honestly, when he was healthy, Eli Mitchell got some of those carries in the running game. So I would not be surprised, especially early in the season, if they are trying to maybe limit his carries and his touches and maybe use him more as a 12 carry, maybe 15 carry type guy, and maybe he has 12 carries and he has 8 catches, right? He's the type of player that can do that. And maybe they try to get, again, particularly early in the season, Eli Mitchell in the game. Or, you mentioned a couple of those type games. Well, if they're playing, the Rams at home and they're winning, or, the Cardinals, whatever, that could be a second half where Eli Mitchell's getting a lot of work and, Christian McCaffrey's getting 3 touches in the second half, right? Or 5 touches in the second half. So I think the logic is spot on there. I mean, everything plays in your favor to bet under, except for the fact that Christian McCaffrey is one of the most talented players in the league. But, take that out. I think you've got to look at the strategy. You've got to look at the probabilities of, again, playing a full season. You've got to look at all those different factors. And again, I think that's why you have to lean under on that, despite the fact, look, he's a guy that if he were healthy and if they wanted to, he could rush for 2,000 yards, right? I mean,
right.
He could double that number. I think if they said, hey, the world's going to end if you don't get Christian McCaffrey 1,800 yards, he could do it. Like, they'd do it, right? They'd give him 30 carries and he'd have 150 yards every week and, whatever. But I just don't think that's going to be what we're going to see with this guy. I think we're going to see, like I said, he gets a dozen carries and, he catches 6 or 7 passes and, they work Eli Mitchell in. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. So I'm with you on that. I think you could bet that under, knowing that, you could look foolish if he ends up with 1,500 yards rushing, but who cares whether he gets 901 or 1,500?
Right.
It doesn't matter, right? I mean, you're playing you're playing what you play here. So I'm with you on the under there.
Yeah. Let me just see if my memory's right here. I was just looking too. So in 11 games with the 49ers last year, he had 4 where he had 15 rushing attempts or more. So 7 where he had less than 15. I just did that math in my head right there on the spot. Just, that's impressive. I know.
Math, man.
But a couple, the biggest ones came at the end of the year. In the last, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games, he had 14, 26, 15, 19. Those were 3 of his highest rushing attempts with the 49ers. And I think they had multiple weapons hurt at that point, like trying to get Debo healthy, trying to get Mitchell healthy, all this stuff. So they were leaning on him more when he got all those carries.
I don't think they want to do that. You nailed it. I mean, he got carries when Mitchell was out. And like you said, Samuel was out for a little bit banged up. That's when they started having to use him. And look, if it gets to one of those things where later in the season, they're trying to get the 1 seed or trying to win the division or, whatever, maybe they do that again, right? I mean, maybe it's like, hey, we're going to have to lean on you for 20 carries and whatever. I don't think early in the season that's going to be the case. I really don't. I think you're going to see a lot of Eli Mitchell taking those handoffs and whoever else. And I think you're going to see McCaffrey much, much more limited, because I don't think they want to do that. I think they want to keep him fresh, healthy, ready to go for that stretch run. So, would I be shocked after those first 8 games if he only had 400 yards rushing? I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I really wouldn't. It's possible, I think.
Yep. All right. Well, hey, to close this out, won't be a lot of suspense with this division, probably, except maybe the top couple. 1 to 4. How do these teams finish in the NFC West?
I'm going to give San Francisco the 1, even though I'm tempted to give it to the Seahawks. Obviously that means I'm giving the Seahawks the number 2 spot. I think I'll give the Rams the 3 spots. So, I'm sticking with Vegas on this only because I think Arizona's bad. That I think that even though the Rams could potentially be really bad as well, I'm going to stick with the Vegas odds. I'm going to go San Fran, Seattle, LA, Arizona. What about you?
Yeah, I think we're very aligned here. I would go San Francisco, Seattle, though I have a game between them in what I'm projecting. So I think it's close. And then I'm going to go Rams, Arizona, but I have a game between them on the bottom end. So I think that's close too, but I will go with those 4 as well. So
hey, real quick, you need, and I haven't been able to find it. I was actually looking before we jumped on here, but there are several books that have top 2 finishers in a division, that you can bet.
Oh yeah.
And in essence, it's kind of like parlaying San Francisco and Seattle. But we've talked about that in years past, where when there's such a gap between, let's say, the top 2, and we think there's a pretty big gap between San Fran, Seattle, and LA and Arizona. It's hard not to bet that. So I haven't seen that. I haven't seen what the odds are, even though I've looked. But that's a bet that I'm going to be seeking out, because if that has anything decent in terms of odds, I'm taking it, because I just don't see how the Rams and Cardinals get into second spot there. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So this is my biggest bet of the year so far. I have it. I got San Francisco and Seattle dual forecast, which means first and second in any order, at -165.
Love it.
And I have the way I bet like 8 units on that, because I just thought, like, I think it's a phenomenal bet. So it's -225 now. I actually don't think that's horrendous still. Like, I still think that's a solid bet.
If you had asked me to guess, I would have guessed probably -200, -250, somewhere in that range. So if you've got it at -165, you're in a good spot. To your point, I don't know that I wouldn't bet it at -225. I think it's still
it's still a good bet.
So, yeah.
The other thing I'll throw out, I actually was going to put this out on Substack, and I didn't, because I didn't end up betting it because I have that bet. I don't remember which book, but if you go look for it, there are books, like I said, where you can bet. I had done the math to work out betting the Rams and the Cardinals to finish like 3rd and 4th, and kind of layering those. So it ended up working out almost like this bet, where San Francisco and Seattle can finish in any order, where it's like Arizona and LA can finish in any order 3-4. And that line was still at -170, the way I worked it out between those 2. So that would be another way to go and look at it.
Yeah, in essence, that's the same thing, but
it is. It's the same bet.
So yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yep. All right. Well, if you have hung with us here through all of this content, but also hopefully some great bets and good insight, number 1, please hit the like. Number 2, follow at Yanni_bet. And check out betcrushers.com. Go and bookmark that. Yanni does some killer divisional previews and stuff before the season, and then tons of DFS and lots of different stuff. And we'll be on plenty of podcasts, I'm sure, talking about tons of NFL. Anything else you would that you're doing that you want people to know about, man?
No, I appreciate the shout out there. I'm looking forward to getting some content out there, and hoping we can all figure out another successful NFL season. So I appreciate you having me on. I know you've got a lot of stuff going on your end, and it's always fun to join you.
Man, I love kicking it around together. That's the most fun part of this. So thanks for jumping on, man. And like I said, hopefully Yanni, you'll be, I think, joining me most weeks or maybe every week to break down these divisions. So I'll be talking to you again soon.
Looking forward to it. Take care.
All right. Thanks, man.